For the majority of my childhood, I only had one big wish, and that was for my dad to come home and for us to finally live together as a family. And when that didn't happen, from my child's perspective, I only had one explanation. Something was wrong with me. I wasn't good enough and I wasn't important enough. Because if I was important enough, then he would choose me over work. Now, today, I can see how innocent that misunderstanding was and how far away it is from the truth. But before I got here, before I understood all of this, it took us about 15 years of having quite a distant and guarded relationship. And today, I want to share with you in this episode what I did to repair my relationship with my dad and how we went from feeling guarded and disconnected and a little distant to having a relationship that's full of freedom and love. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to a new episode of What If It Is Possible, a podcast for your heart and soul that gives you full permission to follow your biggest, boldest, most audacious dreams and goals and helps you see what's possible for you. My name is Taida. I'm your host. I'm the founder of a premium private coaching practice, a professional life and career coach, and I work with heart-centered and ambitious professionals and leaders who want to find their purpose, create fulfilling and meaningful lives doing the work they love and making a real impact. If you're new here, then subscribe, comment, and share this episode with your friends and loved ones so that they can create meaningful and fulfilling lives too. This is, I thought I wasn't important to my dad, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Many of you were interested in this topic when I shared a little picture of me and my dad co-working together on our latest family trip to Sarajevo. So I shared this on Instagram and I asked if you'd be interested in hearing what we did to kind of repair our relationship. And on one hand, I was surprised. I didn't realize, that so many people would be interested. And on the other hand, it didn't surprise me that much simply because I know that the majority of us have a parent topic, and so whether that's mom or dad, and it's a topic that's not yet integrated, and you'll know that it's not integrated if there's still tension in the relationship or some sort of activation or judging or blaming, whether that's overt or covert. So if you're realizing, yeah, I do have my relationship with my dad or with my mom isn't kind of how I want it to be, then you probably have some unresolved topics around that relationship. And so for most of us, it's going to be one parent that's the most critical. So whether that's, your mother or your father. And for me, for example, it's my dad, even though I also, obviously, as I was growing up, had my own topics with my mom, but really it's mostly in our adulthood, it's the parent where we have the most unresolved emotional expectations towards, and there's just a lack of resolution, right? So there was a point in time where they couldn't really give us what we wanted to receive, what we needed to receive as children, and that also didn't happen throughout our lives. So there's some unresolved stuff there, and until it's resolved, we can't really live our full potential. There's always, you can maybe think of it like this, as an energy leak. And as long as there's some energy, your energy, which is so precious, is leaking into that direction, you don't really have that energy, that capability to use it for something productive, something in the future, something creative, because it just keeps flowing into the past, right? Your thoughts and your emotions go there. And then we don't have enough to actually use and generate that for something that we want to be creating in the world. So how does that happen? When we talk about our relationships with our parents, it doesn't need to be this big traumatic thing, right? So for me, it was this repeated, well, I'll obviously share my own story, but it was my dad not being physically and emotionally present throughout my childhood because he didn't live in the same home with us. So he lived in a different country. And my parents are still together. I'll give you a context to this interesting family dynamic a bit later. But it doesn't need to be traumatic. Some of us are going to have more traumatic childhoods in terms of, one of our parents having issues with alcohol or drugs or not being present or even passing away at a young age. All of these are heavily traumatic experiences. And, we delineate between big T trauma and small T trauma. So, whether it was a traumatic experience that still impacts your daily life and you're not able to hold the present moment, that's something that we would describe as big T trauma. And it's something that you would look at in therapy. But, for the majority of us, we're going to have small T trauma. So it's like generally we had a good childhood, we had food on the table, our parents were kind of present, but still we got out of childhood feeling like, there's still something unresolved, and we didn't really get everything that we needed from our parents. And, that being said, even if you grew up in a family with conscious parents, which, today in 2026, more and more people, even in the collective culture, more and more people are becoming more conscious. And it's beautiful to see because the world really is changing. And when I say becoming more conscious, I really mean, okay, we're more conscious of our thoughts, of our behaviors, of our emotions, of being a bit more gentle with ourselves, of kind of questioning also things that our parents didn't really question. And so more parents of today, I'm going to say, approach parenthood with more consciousness. If you think back to your parents, depending on which generation you are, for them, it wasn't at the forefront. Parenting was different. The whole cultural, collective belief system around parenting was very different 40, 50, 60 years ago. So the majority of our parents and our grandparents weren't doing conscious work. But what I was trying to say is that even if you were to grow up in a family of conscious parents that were kind of doing their best, parents are just human beings. They are human beings, and they get to be imperfect, and inevitably that's going to mean that they're not going to be able to fulfill every child's need at every moment in time. And so with these I'm going to say tensions in either child parent relationship, often it can be mundane daily things that leave a big impact. I remember, I'll share my example. This wasn't as big for me, but something similar can have a very big effect on people. So I remember that once I was in kindergarten and my godmother was supposed to pick me up. I think I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and she forgot. And so I was there with the teacher. Like, I was safe, everything was good, there was no ill will. It happens. So I was there with the kindergarten teacher, and all the kids had left already. And from a child's perspective, you don't have that logic in the sense of, oh, okay, it's like 3, my mom works until 5, she's going to pick me up, probably something happened. No, from a child's perspective, it's now. She's not here, something's wrong, something happened, I'm going to be alone. A child sees things very much in black and white. And so obviously there's worry, there's crying, kindergarten teacher trying to calm me down. And then as soon as my mom finished work, she kind of, I think the kindergarten teacher called her, and she was like, no one is picking her up. And so she came running, picked me up. Everything was fine, but what I'm trying to say is that thing, if it's left unresolved and unhealed, or if it's repetitive, it can leave a small t trauma within us that we keep on carrying throughout our lives. And then in adulthood, it can manifest as, in this case, not trusting people, feeling guarded. It has all of these different manifestations that have, I'm going to say, a more, that have um, I- I'll say a negative impact, even though I don't like to use the word positive, negative, but that have a negative impact on our life and on our potential when it comes to our relationships, our success, our earning potential, and all of these things. So know that even if you felt like your parents were good, conscious, I mean, good in terms of they were present for you, and you still got out of the childhood feeling like, oh, but I have this thing with my dad or with my mom, that it's very normal. And then, of course, it's even more normal if you had a more traumatic childhood and a bigger emotional event that's still impacting you today. And so there's several reasons why this activation happens, this unresolved emotional expectations, like we talked about. Maybe there's a need that wasn't fulfilled. Maybe that was a need for emotional safety. Maybe that was just a need to be seen. Maybe a need for stability. So, and the parent wasn't capable of doing that. Or if there's let me just see this in my notes. If a parent is repeatedly unpredictable. And so for a child, a child wants stability, safety, routine, even though it wants to break out from that, but secretly it really, really wants and needs that. And if there's an unpredictability in the pattern of how the parent is showing up, that could leave a child feeling very confused and doesn't know how to interpret it. And then sooner or later, because it sees things in black and white, and it sees itself as the cause of this issue at hand. So probably I did something wrong there. That's why my mom is emotionally distant, or I didn't do well enough at school. That's why my dad didn't come home on the weekend. So it doesn't have the capability to see the bigger picture. And that's where all of these things get created. So I'll share my story and how this whole thing unfolded for me. But know that as you're listening to this, I find it often really helps to hear other people's stories, how they coped with it, the interpretations that we made. That's why I'm sharing in service. And you can listen to this either from the perspective of a child, so as someone who is a child and is kind of reflecting on their own child parent relationship, or you can also listen to it from the perspective of, if you're a parent, how your child may be receiving or interpreting certain things. I find that I often have conversations with my friends who have kids who are parents, and because I seem to remember a lot of, I have a lot of emotional imprints, so I kind of see the world through or feel the world through emotions. And I have a lot of memories of and feelings of how things were for me as a child and what my interpretation was. And that can often be helpful for my friends who want to understand their children better. But of course, children, when they're 4, 5, 6, all the way up to 10, they don't have the vocabulary for these things. And they also don't really understand what's happening on an emotional level. So it can generally be helpful to have someone who can give you a little bit of an insight. So, how my story began is when I was very little. I think either shortly before I was born or when I was 1 or 2 years old, my dad moved to Germany for work. And I'll give you cultural context for this. So, my parents are still married today, 30 plus years. And where I lived, so where I grew up, this was Slovenia, which was a part of former Yugoslavia. Specifically in that time and space, this was nothing unusual. So, in any given village, you would have men who would leave for Germany, for Switzerland, for Austria in search of work, because the thinking that time was, oh, those countries, you can earn more, they pay better, and with the money that you earn, you can send it back home and provide for your family in a better way. So it was very much, the thinking was, I'm doing this for my family so that they can have a better life. So very normal. I mean, for me, in my family, my uncle lived like that. My uncle's father and his brother lived like that. My dad went that route too. So it was nothing unusual. It also wasn't something unusual for women, to kind of, they're home, they're taking care of kids, and the husbands are out kind of making money abroad. And the thinking was always, okay, I'm going to live here until I until I retire, and then I'll come back to the homeland. So it was always this temporary thing. And even when I was growing up, and I think something that kind of, as a child, messed me up a little bit was, I would always hear, well, this is just temporary. This is just temporary. And so I would always wonder, but when is my dad coming home? And then parents, I mean, bless them, because what else are they going to say? Well, your dad's going to come home soon, and he's going to come home soon, just a couple of years. And so then you're like, okay, just a couple of years. And then a couple of years passes. And then you're like, okay, now he's coming home. And it's no, it's another couple of years. And so I remember for me, that was kind of where that a sense of distrust started to develop as a child, because, well, you're telling me one thing, but it's not really happening. But so what I'm trying to say is that back then, this was the 90s, and it was happening before also, but just to kind of share my time and space, this was the 90s, so very normal for this to happen. And also very normal for, people weren't really thinking about the impact that this is going to have on the child. I mean, it wasn't, that wasn't part of the collective parenting. It wasn't written in books. It wasn't studied. I mean, all of that stuff came a bit later when we, started to understand what the absence of a parent can have on a child's psyche and their fulfillment and all of that. So, it was just generally, in my area at least, accepted, okay, men go off to work, even if it's abroad, and women kind of manage the raising of the child or the children. So again, nothing that anyone was questioning or that people were finding weird. So that's why they made that decision in good faith that, it's fine, it's normal. And for me, I mean, granted, I also saw examples of this, and I didn't think it was strange. I saw like I said, my aunt raising her son at home, and my uncle, her husband, living abroad. So very, very normal. The other thing that I think that they weren't considering was the, not the weight maybe, but that in this constellation, the majority of the parental tasks were now in the hands of one parent. So the one parent was really strictly like more focused on earning and providing, and the other parent was more taking care of the nurturing and the raising, which is again very different perspective than we have today. But we need to understand the context of that time, because that's when those decisions were being made. And I actually see that this is very much changing, especially in the West. But because I, love and adore Korean culture, I'm learning more about Japanese culture. I can see that this is not necessarily thinking of men leaving homes to earn money and things like that, but just in terms of the providing is in the hands of the man, the nurturing and raising of the children in the hands of the woman, that thinking is still collective thinking now. Doesn't mean that every individual thinks like that, but it's in the collective unconscious, that it's still anchored more there, but it's changing here. So my dad took this opportunity abroad, and for me, as I was growing up, for you to have an idea kind of how much I saw him, we saw each other about a month a year. That was maybe a couple of weeks around Christmas, a couple of weeks in the summer, maybe a week in February for my holidays, and a week over Easter. So that was it. And then in between, we had phone calls. And that was about the extent of the connection that we had, if we're talking about really kind of touch points, communication touch points, or being present with each other. And the telephone calls weren't that long. It was the 90s. Calling abroad or internationally, it was quite expensive back then. And I often, when I see, us WhatsApping today when I'm in Germany and I'm WhatsApping with my little nieces and nephews here, with my friends or family members, and we have conversations that go on for like half an hour or an hour, it really allows more for that connection to be built. But back then it was, phone calls were like 5 to 10 minutes long, and for every family member, because otherwise it would get too expensive. And so as a child, I remember that, I loved my dad so much. He was my hero. Whenever he came home, I just wanted to spend time with him. I think I would even fight with my mom. I didn't want him to hang out with her. I was like, just be with me. So I was very much, just loving him fully, as a child does, innocently and unconditionally. And I know that my biggest wish at the time was for him to come home. For him to come home and for us to live together as a family. And I still remember that as a child, because I carried that wish with me. I should actually rephrase. The inner child in me carried this wish with me until about 2-3 years ago. So this is like a very core foundational wish. And I just didn't have, I don't know, for some reason, that part needed a little bit of time before it got healed. But that was my big wish. Of course I had material wishes, and I was like, can you buy me this? Can you buy me that? As we all do. But if we're talking about like soul centered wishes, then that was it. Like, just for my dad to come home. And then, like I mentioned before, like hearing, yeah, he's coming in 2 years, he's coming in 1 year, just a little bit. He's coming when you finish elementary school. And then that didn't happen. And, all of that stuff. So what had happened was that until I was about, I want to say 6 to 8 years old, it was a period of, comings and goings, and that childhood innocence and that unconditional love were still untouched. I mean, thinking about it, I'm like, doesn't a child always unconditionally love their parents? I don't know, maybe something to think about. But in that time period, I was still very excited to see my dad when he came home, so he would come, he would leave, he would come, he would leave. It was this huge excitement, like my best days of the year or when he came home, and then the worst days was when he left. And those were just, I can still remember the pain, and I have images in front of my mind's eye when he would leave and there would be hysteric crying, and all of this stuff. Because again, for a child, it seems like forever. You don't understand the concept of time in the sense of, oh yeah, he's coming, rationally, as we do. Oh, he's coming back in a month and then we'll see each other again, or something like that. It's forever. So it was just this wound that kept hurting and hurting and hurting. And so there was one moment in time, and I remember this moment because it was after it was so emotionally charged for me. It was after another one of these hard goodbyes. And because, they kept on getting, for me, worse and worse. And I know that they were really bad for him too. I wasn't there seeing him cry when he got in the car, but that's what happened for him too. He was going through his own process. So there was one moment when I decided, no more. So that was kind of where my coping strategy came to life. And I decided, no more. I can't handle another goodbye, because up until that point, my heart was wide open. It was like, here it is, here it is. I love you so much. But then I just, something in my system, it was too painful. It was too painful. And so my strategy at the time to protect myself was to put up walls, to put up really big walls and to not let him close anymore. So I was like, well, you've hurt me so much. Literally, I remember thinking this, you've hurt me so much. Now I'm going to be the one that hurts you. I'm not going to let you close to me anymore because it hurts too much. And that was the moment, that was when the switch kind of turned on, where I didn't allow my dad to come close to me anymore. So I was very guarded. And then obviously, that same coping strategy that I developed with my dad kept on, like I took it with me into adulthood. And it was the same thing, like guarding myself from relationships, from, just this protection in place. Like, no, I can't let anyone too close, like being very distrusting and careful with people and who I let in, because, I was protecting something that was very, very vulnerable. And in my adulthood, still unhealed. And it's like, until you heal that part, how are you going to let someone close? The risk is too high. So as you can see, like, those parts really need to be integrated and taken care of before we can really open up our hearts again. So that was the moment where my coping strategy was born, which is, I'll push you away, push you away. And of course, the story underneath it all was, because how else is a child going to try to understand? Something has to be wrong with me. Something has to be wrong with me. I'm obviously not enough. I'm not important enough. I'm not a priority. Because if I was all of these things, for me, or from a child's perspective, it's all about that relationship. And if it doesn't understand, how can work be more important than me? How? It just doesn't, that's not a jump that a little child can make. And so then the interpretation is often to our own disadvantage. So it's not like, oh, sure, my dad is living abroad, he's working abroad to take care of, so, to make sure that I can live a nice life and that I can have things that he wasn't able to have as a child. But the interpretation then is, well, then I did something wrong, or I'm not good enough. So those were the stories that I took with me into the adulthood. And interestingly, at some point, that if that's the core story that gets developed, that's kind of what you live out of from, consciously or unconsciously. And how it showed up for me is that I felt very small. I didn't really feel worthy at all. My sense of worth was all tied in with achievements. It definitely wasn't tied in with me as a person. I'm good enough as Taida, as who I am. But it was tied in with, because the personal I had kind of already interpreted I wasn't enough, because if I was, then my dad would kind of decide to come home. But I then kind of found another strategy, which was to increase my worth by having good grades and by performing and by achieving well. And that's why I also have a little bit, not a little bit, but I have, I have a lot of Enneagram 3 within me. I'm an Enneagram 4, which is the individualist, but the Enneagram 3 is also an achiever. And, but anyways, our core motivations are different, but I have a lot of the behaviors of that type because I kind of, thought, and again, all of these things that we're talking about, this is all unconscious. It's nothing that we're like sitting around and contemplating and thinking about. It's like, as human beings, we kind of want to, even though we don't feel worthy, we do kind of want to feel worthy. And so we try to find and learn, okay, but what does society value? Okay, well, they value grades, they value achievements, and they applaud you for that. And so then maybe, I'm good, or that makes me good. So I was living that pattern out for all of my life. And today I can talk about it so freely because it's integrated, and I can, I carry it with lightness in my heart. But obviously, it's not, if you live your life out of this place of I'm not good enough, I'm only worthy if I achieve, I'm not a priority, then you're attracting also people into your life who mirror that back. And so either that's romantic partners who are, uninterested or emotionally unavailable, or opportunities that are small where you're like, you're not going for the highest paid job, but you're going for something that you feel is more in your range, in your worth range, So again, this is how it impacts your romantic relationships, the quality of the partners that you let in. Because, when once you understand and you start to really get your inner worth, there are so many things that you're like just plainly not interested in. You're just like, that's that doesn't do it for me. That's not enough. And you really, when you value yourself, you attract people into your life that value you, but that valuing has to start here with you. Same with earning potential. That's why money is so interconnected with self-worth. Same with body image, by the way. But since we're on this topic, if you don't think that you're worthy, you're always going to keep yourself small, and you're only going to allow yourself to earn that much or to create a certain amount of income. So anything that gets created in our childhood, these core stories that mostly have to do with our parents, it really is worthwhile to have a look at it, because it has a huge, huge, huge impact on our lives and our potential. If we zoom out, I want to offer you something else here. So there's a core story that we talked about that gets created through your lived experience. So whatever you lived through as a child, and your father and mother dynamics, and the stories that you interpreted out of those dynamics. And then there's another very important thing, which is your genes. So we know that trauma, big T, small t, doesn't matter, gets passed down through DNA for at least 4 generations. So this is epigenetics. I mean, also from family constellations, if you've ever been to one, it's very clear how a couple of generations back can have a massive impact on what's happening in your current family dynamics. So that plays a role too. So not only the experience that you've, plays a role on your core stories, not only the experiences that you lived through, but also what you kind of brought with you in your genes, because you're carrying the genes of your ancestors. And so for me, I had, very interestingly, but for sure not a coincidence, both of my grandmothers were sent away as babies or as very little children to live away from their mothers and fathers. So both of them were raised essentially by their aunts. And this was, so not one generation back, 2 generations back, where it was even more normal for families who had lots of kids, 4, 5, 6, and not enough food to put on the table, to send the youngest kids away to live with their sisters or brothers, who had less kids, or who, in the case of one of my grandmas, she was sent to a sister of her mother who couldn't have children herself. So the thinking was, well, I have one too much. I mean, sad from our perspective, but in the cultural context of the time, it was nothing weird. And they both had access to their mothers. It wasn't like the access was broken, but it wasn't like the relationship wasn't really built. So that was in my genes, both of them feeling not worthy, because their mothers gave them away, essentially, felt very abandoned. And one of my grandparents, one of my grandfathers, so his father didn't recognize him as a legitimate child. So he never had a relationship with his father either. And there was an abandonment wound there too. So you can see there's like theme of abandonment running through my family system. And if you've ever done a genogram, I think it's called in English, this is some, you can realize, or maybe you'll be able to see some of the topics that run through your system. They're very obvious once you kind of have that in front of you. It could be different things. It could be alcoholism. It could be affairs. Lots of different things. It could be suicide attempts. It could be accidents. It could be murders, lots of things. And lots of this stuff also gets uncovered in family constellations. So I'll share more about that in a little bit. But if you have that in your genes, that just amplifies that story that you're carrying, which is why it's that much important, to work through it too. So if you carry this wound, I mentioned a couple of times that until this is here, kind of within you, unhealed, unintegrated, it's going to have an impact on your adult relationships. So this is kind of now your hardware, your blueprint that you carry unconsciously through life, believing that this is what it is. You don't even question it. So I wasn't questioning that I'm not good enough. I just didn't feel good enough, or that I'm not a priority. I'm not a priority. Like, that's just what it was. I felt triggered by it when by other people, when I didn't feel a priority. There was hurt in me because that was kept on being triggered. But I didn't question it. All I saw was, oh my God, this feels bad. You just triggered me. You did something wrong, as you do when you feel like everyone else is to blame for your emotions. And I didn't really know what to do with it. So, but the gift of life, okay, is that throughout your life, because of your core story, you're going to keep on attracting people that kind of fit the mold, that fit that blueprint like a glove. There's no coincidences in this life. So you attract these people, they fit like a glove, and they trigger that same thing, that same wound that got triggered by your mom, by your dad, that same thing, like they press on it exactly. And it's like, you just kind of that guttural feeling of hurt and pain that gets touched there. And there's always two options how you can see things. You can see things as, oh my God, this person is doing something to me. Or the approach that, we take in coaching and therapy is to really look at it. Well, what are they triggering in me? what is this here in me? Because this is what we always have control over. We don't have control over the other person, but what's happening here, and then healing that. And in life, we're going to have lots of opportunities to heal that, and people that trigger that in us are essentially here, that are like, oh, look, there's still something that you haven't healed, and I'm just here to shine a light on that so that you do the work and heal it. And then we get to do the work and heal it. And luckily, however we choose to do it, it's work that has long lasting effects, and healing not just for our children and our descendants, but also for our ancestors. So, doing this kind of work is incredibly, incredibly healing and enriching. And healing in this case, I just want to make this clear, it doesn't mean, oh, this is never going to get triggered again. It's almost like, I want you to see this as, this is a part of my core story. It's a part of who I am. And it doesn't mean that it won't get triggered. But what happens when you do this kind of work is that the time that you're triggered, the time that you're in pain, or activation gets way shorter. So, right before, if it could take you weeks to get through, I don't know, someone not calling you back, and, kind of thinking about it, carrying it with you all the time, I'm not important, this and that, then when you do this work, you shorten that to, I mean, for me today, it could be from a couple of minutes to a couple of hours, depending on the topic. And it used to be, when I was younger, and definitely before I did any kind of inner work, it could be weeks. It could be weeks where you just carry this weight around, or for some people, months, for some people, years. And you kind of remember when we talked about that energy leaking into that, and just not having enough energy to put it anywhere else. And so that's why we do this kind of work, to understand what's happening, how can I integrate it, and when it happens again, when I get triggered, which I will, how do I self-regulate, and how do I come back into my power, into how do I wake up from this story? Because when we get triggered in the present day moment, it's really our inner child from back then that gets triggered. That's the part that's hurt. Mostly, there are going to be things that are going to hurt you today, but when the reaction is, I'm going to say, much bigger in comparison to the current situation, or with a normal response, let's say someone's late, 3 minutes late, and you just flip out, which has happened to me too. So no judgment here. If the reaction is disproportionate to the event, then that gives you a huge clue that it's an older inner topic. But yeah, so the idea really is, how do you integrate, and how can you regulate in the here and now, so that you're good in 2-3 minutes, and you can, in the best case scenario, laugh about it and move on, and put your focus on your life, on the here and now, and on what you want to create. So then what's the way out? Well, it's definitely not blaming and judging our parents. And although it's a part of the process, if you're in therapy or if you're in coaching, you will go through a period where you really get to, you're allowed to be frustrated, to be sad, to be annoyed, to be all of the feelings that you were feeling back then. So it is important, that we also give you permission to point fingers and all of that stuff. But really, the way out isn't through blaming and holding grudges and having an expectation. I mean, you can try, and please tell me if it helps. From my experience, that's a strategy that keeps us it keeps us in place. It doesn't allow the energy to flow, and it doesn't really lead to a productive solution. It's kind of like this analogy, if you've ever heard it. It's kind of like drinking the poison yourself and hoping that the other person would, I don't know, how do you call it? Get poisoned. You are the person essentially that's drinking that poison. And so we want to get you to another place. But again, you have full permission in these processes to blame and judge and all of these things. It's a natural part of the process. For some of us, what I observe in the when we do these processes is also that we find it hard to, well, some of us are like, yeah, you sucked. It's very easy to go to that place. For other people, it's like, no, 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 I can't. My parents were great. I can't say a bad word about them, even though, they weren't perfect, but, some, some of us don't allow ourselves to go there because we're still, in that protection mode. Because as children, we want to protect our parents, even though we're so small and innocent, but really we want to protect them. And there's a respect for them that we inherently feel as children, but also that we've been taught. And it feels like, okay, I'm going against my parents. I'm going against this protection. And so we first need to allow ourselves to see our parents as human beings that have also made mistakes, to hold them accountable for their actions, to see that, what, they also had certain responsibilities as parents. They're not necessarily bad people, but they can still be responsible for their choices, which they are, just as you are responsible for your choices. And that's not a bad thing. So we want to give ourselves, what I'm trying to say, we want to give ourselves a period of where we can really kind of be like, yeah, you did this wrong and that wrong, but we don't want to hang out there because that's not the path to resolution. And I'll share the steps to the resolutions and the steps that I took next. One of the first things that brought me and my dad closer together. So, after all of that period, I was sharing about, so up until the age of 8, I was like, oh, here's my heart, open heart, Dad, I love you, that unconditional love. And then from like 8 until 24, I want to say, is where I started to shut him out. And the way that it looked like, we were still spending time together, but he had no access to me unless, in certain moments where my walls would break down a little bit, but that was rare. So it was like my wall was up, he was trying to get in, he couldn't get in, he would move away, then I would follow, because then I got scared. Oh my God, now he moved away, now he's leaving me. And so it was just this unhealthy push pull dynamic, and just a very guarded relationship with no, I don't want, just interrupted flow of love between both of us. So one of the things that really, I want to say, started building that bridge between us was us having a conversation together when I was about 24, because I had been putting the pieces together and I was like, wait a second, something's off here. I don't want to, I don't want to have this distant relationship with my dad. I mean, he's my dad. I love my dad. I want to just do the best I can. And also, this was, I think, a period of time where there was a death that really triggered me and just opened up all of these questions, about how long we're here. And you never know how long our parents are going to be here. And so that kind of also motivated me to get some things off my chest. And so we had a conversation, I still remember, and it wasn't a long conversation, but I allowed myself to utter the words that I was just kind of pushing down all this time, which was just came straight out of my vulnerability. No finger pointing, but it was, I really wanted you to come home. I really missed you. And I don't know why you chose work over me. And I didn't think I was ever important to you, or that you really loved me. And that just kind of cracked both of us open, and we cried, and kind of, I think that was the first moment where our hearts started opening up. And, and for some of us, we're going to be able to have that conversation. And for some of us, that won't be possible because for whatever reason, our parents are not there. They're either not physically there or they're just not there on a conscious level. So I want to say, regardless if you have this conversation or not, there's lots of other strategies I'm going to talk with you about. If you do have an opportunity to do it, to say it, to share your experience, then it can be very, very healing just to put it out there. And I tell you, for me back then, I felt like such a huge weight was lifted off my shoulders. And I didn't allow myself to say that earlier because I was like, oh my God, I don't want my dad to feel guilty. See, as children, again, we're protecting our parents. I don't want him to feel guilty for what he did. But then still, I was the one hurting as a child. You're always innocent as a child. And so I wanted to share because I wanted to have a better relationship with him, and he felt the same. So again, we started to rebuild, and that was the first step. The second step, well, not the second step, but I'm going to say the rest of the process, a lot of that process was with me, and that would be my invitation for everyone who's listening and who's like, I really want to repair my relationship with my parent or both of my parents. It's doing your work. For one reason, a lot of times our parents won't be able to be the parents that we want them to be, not because they don't want to, but because they can't. They don't have that capacity. And if we're here holding on to the thought and the hope that if we tell them something and then they're going to change and then they don't, because we don't have control over that, then we're the ones hurting. So the only thing you ever always have control over is how you feel and your own healing journey. So what I did, well, this will for sure not come as a surprise for you, but I questioned a couple of thoughts multiple times. One, I'll share a couple that were the biggest ahas for me. He abandoned me. I was sure, 100% sure. If you were to ask me 10, 15 years ago, my dad abandoned me. Blank, point blank. That's it. There's no doubt. This was my absolute truth. But when I started questioning the thought, I was like, well, yes, in some ways it was an abandonment, but he kept coming back. It wasn't like he left, bye, you don't matter to me. He kept coming back. He's still here, he's still here. He's still making an effort in the capacity that he can. And the other one I questioned later on, and this was recently, I'm not important. And he's not choosing me. And when I questioned that one, I was like, oh my God, he's been choosing me all my life. Like, that's a part of the reason why he went abroad, to provide for a better life for his wife and his child. And, he's choosing me and spending time with me and calling me and all of these big and small things like, hey, let me help you with this. How are you doing with this? So do you want to do this? So until you're caught in the thinking he's not choosing me, your brain's not going to be able to see the millions of ways that he still is, and he was choosing me. So that was an important part of the journey. The other important part was doing my inner child work. So we talked about inner children, and luckily we know that today as adults, we can actually do inner child work with our inner kids, and we can make sure that they feel good and safe. And so up until recently, for example, I realized that I carried this expectation towards my dad, like, but I want him to be more playful, or I want him to be more engaged. I want him to be more vulnerable, like being kind of that parent that I wanted, same as probably you wanted your dad to be or your mom to be, and they just weren't like that. And I realized I was having this expectation towards him. And then it hit me in one moment. It's like, well, my adult version of myself loves my dad exactly as he is, in all of his colors, even when he's upset or with all, I still love him. But my little one, my little child really wanted him to give her those things. Those were her needs. And I also had the realization, it's like, no matter how many conversations I have with my dad, no matter how many times I'm like, but can you be more attentive? And can you be like more this? It doesn't help. That's an potential outer solution to an inner problem. And that's not going to solve the inner problem. The inner problem needs to be solved on an inner level. And so if our parents can't give us that, we're the ones that can give us that in the present moment. And so then I was like, oh my God, that distinction, between understanding my adult self is completely fine and okay with my dad being who he is. It's my inner child that needs certain things. And let me give my inner child those things like safety or playfulness or vulnerability. And once I did that, it really settled. And not only that, I'm able to really allow my dad to be who he is, even when he's sulking or when he's working or, whatever he's doing. Like, he really gets to be who he is. And I think that's such a beautiful present that we can give to each other, and then at the same time take care of ourselves. I also did family constellations, which, like I mentioned before, I would suggest everyone or recommend everyone to do family constellations. This is whether your parents are alive or not, whether you have a relationship or not. No one needs to come to the family constellation with you. You can go there on your own, and you're going to put a certain order to your family system. And this is the beautiful thing about family constellations. It operates on an unconscious level, and it brings order to a family system that is not in order. So there are certain rules in family systems that Beat Hellinger, who advanced that method to a place where it is today, discovered the rules of love. I also recorded a podcast episode on this if you want to learn more. Very fascinating. But yes, I would definitely invite you to do that, because you're, like I mentioned before, you're doing this not just for you, for your own peace and potential, but also for your descendants and for your ancestors. So it's fascinating. And one of the rules in family constellations is that parents need to be respected, regardless, even if they were the shittiest parents ever, even if they gave you up for adoption, or they weren't present at all, or they didn't care about you, whatever it was. The reason why, it's one of the rules of love that he discovered, which is like, until a child isn't in a position of respect towards their parents, their life is not going to, they're not going to be able to live their life in full potential, because that's the natural order of things. And one of the ways that this is visible, and this is why I love family constellations, because every change is visible, because the players change, or the representatives change. A family system is in order when, for example, a child kneels in front of their parent, especially in front of a parent that they've held judgment or blame or resentment towards. And once a child is kneeling, because that's their natural position, respect towards the elderly, then hearts open with the parent and the child. And that can then allow room for healing. And as long as the child is in this kind of resentful position, turning their back on their parents, or kind of facing them without kneeling, that brings disorder. And of course, that then impacts your everyday adult life. So very fascinating. I also knelt in front of, when I did this family constellation, I also knelt in front of my dad because I went to like an intensive with my parents, family constellation intensive, where we did constellations for a week in Madeira. And I mean, you can do it without your parents, like I mentioned, but if they're there, they're just going to kind of be pulled into the constellation. And so I knelt in front of my dad, and it was it was another thing that really brought us closer, and like a really beautiful way of coming together. And I'll give you another image from the family constellation, because for someone who may not have a close relationship to their dad, and kneeling seems like not an option because they just disappointed you so much, or it was such a painful relationship. The other thing that we did was, after that whole kneeling situation, your parents are also kind of for your inner child, especially, they hold you in a sense. They're your protectors and stability, and especially a paternal figure is a figure of, you know, the gift of the father figure, if you want, or the father archetype, is stability, safety, providing, authority. That's what that archetype teaches us. And so for an inner child, I remember there was a moment where we both stood up, or I stood up, and then I laid my here, I wanted to say, laid my head on his shoulder, and I just got to be held by him, or my inner child got to be held by him. And that was another very healing process. Now, here I have to say, even if your real parent isn't able to do this, it doesn't matter, because if you solve it on an unconscious level with a representative in family constellations, or with yourself and in other inner processes, it will go into order. You don't need your parents to do this work, but those things are needed in order to bring some more structure into this disconnected family system. I also did lots of self-forgiveness towards my dad and allowed him to be who he is. So self-forgiveness, or compassionate self-forgiveness, is a way of us letting go of judgments and blame. And I'm sure that all of us have like this long of a list, whether we're aware of it or not. And the moment we start letting that go is the moment we free ourselves. It's like the best feeling ever. So I, of course, had a long list. Any should goes directly on this list. You should have chosen this. You should have done this. You should be more this, or you should be different, or you should be less this. You did this to me, all of this stuff. So self-compassion really is a gift that you give to yourself. If blaming and judging is a poison that you give to yourself, then self-compassion is a gift that you give to yourself, is like a healing potion that you give to yourself. And so that really, really helped me to accept him and see him for who he was, and seeing him for the good things that he did. Because as long as I was stuck in that self-forgiveness, as long as I was stuck in that blaming, I only saw one side, and that was he abandoned me. Period. I wasn't important. I wasn't able to see all of the other things, and nor was I able to see him really as a human being in all of his colors. I also wanted to say, if this is hard, because this is a process, and I know that for me, for some sentences, it took me years to be able to really forgive them. In family constellations, there's also this rule, whereas like your parents deserve your respect just because they gave you life. And that's the greatest gift that they could have ever given you. And so, this is a particularly helpful perspective for those of you who don't have a good relationship or have had a traumatic relationship with your parents, which is like, if nothing else, they gave you that gift, the gift of life. And if that's the only thing you can hold on to, then you hold on to that, because without that, and in family constellations, oh my God, why am I coming back to this so much? But it's so beautiful. Really, these processes are beautiful. For if parents are divorced and maybe they have, I don't know, they don't see eye to eye, or they're fighting or whatever they're doing, not agreeing essentially, and the child is hurting because it's observing their parents not getting along, then something very healing that we say, or that you say, is, your father and mother loved each other very much. They used to love each other very much. And they loved each other so much that when they loved each other the most, you were created. So even if after that they didn't love each other as much, there was a moment when they loved each other so much that you came to the world. Okay, so just wanted to offer that to you in case it resonates. I'm going to also offer you another perspective. So from a spiritual perspective, if we look at us as souls who came to earth to have a human experience, so not humans with a soul, but souls who come to earth for a human experience, from that perspective, we chose our parents, and our parent chose us to create certain experiences in this world and to learn certain lessons. From a perspective of spiritual psychology, soul is always going to want to grow, it's always like it's a constant change, constant evolution, constant growth. And we need players in order to grow. We can't grow on our own. We need people, we need other human beings, where we can grow. And growth happens you'll know this, but the biggest growth happens not through harmony, but when there's conflict, or when there's tension, or when there's triggers, or when there's something that's not going to plan. And then you go through that, you work through it, and then it comes to expansion. So it's contrast, something that you don't want to happen, something that contracts you, and then a solution comes, and then you expand. And so from this perspective, we all choose to play this game together. It's not a coincidence who your parents are, who your friends are. Nothing is a coincidence. And so we're here to teach them lessons, and they're here to teach us lessons. And if you're a parent, you will know very well that your kids have a huge potential to trigger the most vulnerable parts of you. And that they are your biggest teachers, because if you really then start healing what they trigger, that's when that integration happens, and you'll know that you've changed, that you've integrated, when something that they would have done or said in the past doesn't trigger you anymore. It's not as emotionally upsetting as it used to be. That's such a huge sign where you're like, interesting. That really doesn't get to me anymore. Or it gets to me like a little bit, it's like a tiny little sting, but not like this, like as if someone came to you with a sword. So yes, we're all teaching each other certain lessons, and these are, bigger lessons. I know for me, my dad is for sure teaching me how to love myself despite everything. And I know that I'm teaching my dad how to be more vulnerable, how to be more emotional, how to be more open and authentic. So we're all here to teach each other something. As a result of all of this inner work I did, so as you were able to see, there was that one conversation that I mentioned, but the rest was really just inner work. And as a result of that inner work, our relationship started to shift. If before it was just lots of walls and there was really no bridge between our hearts, now my walls started crumbling down. Maybe first there was like a little window, and then there was a door, and then we actually got closer and closer together. Does that mean, that I don't get triggered by him? No, of course I still get triggered by him. Some things don't trigger me at all. I can say with full confidence it's completely healed. And other things, it's still like a sting that I get to work through, and vice versa. And the point that I wanted to make with the inner work though was that the relationship started to shift once I did the inner work. So there was no expectation on my end for my dad to do anything. But the more I did my inner work, the more we, naturally started coming closer without him needing to change. And that's why we do it. And that's the easier approach to change. Now, of course, you could also do this in a relationship, in a conscious relationship, where the other person also understands, and that's where healing can take place. If, however, you are speaking to someone who's not conscious of this and they go into judging and blaming, and if your parent isn't someone who can hold space for your emotions and your perspectives and they take it personally, then you're better off doing this work on your own and then just observing how your relationship naturally shifts. And today, trust me that we tried all this stuff. We had so many conversations where we were like, okay, so then we want to improve our relationship, and then you're going to change this and I'm going to change this and we're going to do our best. I mean, it doesn't really happen because, like I mentioned before, it's an outer solution to an inner problem. So the outer solution is not going to help. It's not going to change the behavior. But when I did my own stuff, I don't know what he did, nor do I have the expectation that he does any kind of work. All I know is that my relationship with him is 1,000 times different than it was before, and that he has now access to my heart, and I accept him for who he is. And that's exactly the relationship that I wanted to have, and that comes as a result of doing all of this work. And it gives the other person the gift of, you know what, actually, I love you for who you are. It's just as when we were kids, with that unconditional love, we're like, you know what? I love you exactly as you are. Exactly. Because I see love, I take you exactly as you are. So there you go. I think that covers it. Thank you so much for joining me for this special episode, and leave a comment on YouTube with your biggest insight or your aha moment, or send me a DM on Instagram at Taida Glaser. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear which parent you feel challenges you the most, where there's most tension, what challenge that is, and how it's impacting your life today. And if there's someone in your life whom you think this episode could really serve, then please share it with them. It may be just the thing that unlocks something for them. Know that you matter. Know that your dreams matter. And remember that anything is possible when you start to change your inner world. Sending you lots of blessings, lots of love. I can't wait to see you back here next week. Mwah.